He looked at her across the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared cheap coffee for 5 years, and slid a manila envelope across the wood. Kristen didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to erase her. He told her she was too plain, too poor, and too boring for the empire he was building. He was leaving her for a woman who had everything Gray didn't: fame, money, and a pedigree. Or so he thought, because Kristen made one fatal calculation error. He never asked his quiet, penny-pinching wife who her grandmother was. He's about to find out that the woman he's discarding isn't a nobody. She's the woman who owns the very ground he stands on. This is the story of the regret that destroyed a man. The rain in Seattle always felt like a personal insult when your life was falling apart. But on this Tuesday in November, it felt like an omen. Gray stood by the window of their minimalist, grayscale apartment in the denial phase of grief, watching the water streak down the glass. Behind her, the sound of a zipper. Sharp, final. Kristen was packing the last of his suits. Not just any suits, the bespoke Italian wool ones Gray had saved for months to buy him as a congratulatory gift when he made junior partner at Sterling and Finch. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Gray," Kristen said. His voice was devoid of warmth, the same tone he used when firing an underperforming intern. "Just sign the papers on the counter. The settlement is fair. Generous, actually, considering you brought 0 assets into this marriage." Gray turned. She was wearing a faded, oversized cardigan, her brown hair pulled back in a messy, practical bun. She looked exactly like what she was, a librarian at the Seattle Public Library, a woman who clipped coupons, bought generic brands, and preferred nights in with a book over galas at the Space Needle. "Fair?" Gray asked, her voice trembling slightly. She walked over to the kitchen island, picking up the heavy document. "Kristen, you're offering me $5,000 and the old Honda. We've been married for 6 years. I worked 2 jobs while you finished your MBA. I paid the rent on that shoebox in Capitol Hill so you could intern for free." Kristen sighed, snapping his suitcase shut. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way. Steel blue eyes, a jawline that could cut glass, and the arrogance of a man who had started believing his own LinkedIn profile. That was an investment, Gray. And let's be honest, it didn't pay off for me emotionally. We've outgrown each other. "Look at you," he gestured vaguely at her outfit, "and look at where I'm going. I need a partner who can navigate the world I'm entering, someone who understands legacy, someone who doesn't panic when the bill at Cannes comes." "Isabella understands legacy, I suppose," Gray said quietly. Kristen froze. He hadn't told her the name. He didn't think she knew. "Bella," he corrected, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "Her name is Bella. And yes, her father is the CEO of DuPont Logistics. She grew up in this world, Gray. She doesn't need a manual to know which fork to use. She shines. You fade." The cruelty of it took the air out of the room. It wasn't just that he was leaving. It was that he was rewriting their history to justify it. He was painting her as an anchor, dragging him down, rather than the sail that had kept him steady. "She's waiting downstairs, isn't she?" Gray asked. "In the Porsche," Kristen said, checking his Rolex. A gift from Bella, no doubt. "Look, sign the papers. I've already spoken to the landlord. The lease is up in 2 weeks. You'll need to find a place. Maybe something out in Tacoma? It's cheaper." He grabbed his suitcase and walked to the door. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He just opened the door, and the sound of the latch clicking shut echoed like a gunshot in the silent apartment. Gray stood there for a long time. She didn't cry. That was the strange part. She expected to collapse, to scream, to throw the vase of dead flowers against the wall, but instead a strange, cold calm settled over her. It was a familiar feeling, one she hadn't felt since she was a little girl in a very different life, in a very different country. She walked to the window and looked down. 3 stories below, she saw Kristen exit the building. He popped the trunk of a sleek, silver Porsche Panamera. A woman stepped out of the passenger side, blonde, leggy, dressed in a white trench coat that probably cost more than Gray's annual salary. Isabella DuPont. She laughed at something Kristen said, throwing her head back, radiant and victorious. Kristen kissed her, right there on the street, oblivious to the woman watching from the window above. Gray turned away from the window. She walked to the bedroom, not to pack, but to the back of her closet. She pushed aside the sensible wool coats and the denim jackets. There, hidden inside an old, beat-up shoebox that Kristen had never bothered to open because it was labeled knitting supplies, was a small velvet pouch and a satellite phone. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the pouch. Inside lay a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a heavy signet ring made of dark gold, bearing a crest that hadn't been seen in high society columns for a decade, a double-headed eagle holding a sword and a scepter. She slipped the ring onto her pinky finger. It still fit. Then she picked up the satellite phone. It was an old model, heavy and brick-like. She dialed a number she had memorized when she was 12 years old. It rang once, twice. "Ja?" a voice answered. Crisp, German accent. Elderly, but sharp as a razor. "Hans," Gray said, her voice changing. The tremble was gone. The soft librarian cadence vanished, replaced by a tone of absolute command, a tone that had been bred into her bloodline for 600 years. "It's me." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of a chair scraping back, as if the man had stood up out of respect, even over the phone. "Your Highness," Hans whispered, "we have been waiting." "I'm coming out of the dark, Hans," Gray said, staring at the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. "Activate the trust, prepare the jet, and get me the file on Sterling and Finch. Of course. Should we notify the Grand Duke?" "Not yet," Gray said, her eyes narrowing. "First, I have a husband to divorce. He wants a settlement. He wants to talk about a legacy. I'm going to give him a lesson in history." She hung up the phone. Gray walked back to the kitchen. She picked up the pen Kristen had left. He had signed his name in aggressive, looping strokes. Kristen A. Sterling. Underneath, on the line for the spouse, she didn't sign Gray Sterling. Nor did she sign Gray Whitney, the alias she had used to hide from the paparazzi and the kidnappers for the last 10 years. She signed the name on her birth certificate, the name that opened doors at the Vatican and caused bank managers in Zurich to sweat. Gray von Habsburg Lothringen. She looked at the signature. Then she pulled out her smartphone, the cheap Android with the cracked screen, and opened her banking app. Current balance, $412.50. "Enjoy the Porsche, Kristen," she whispered to the empty room, "because you just divorced the heir to the Duchy of Styria." 2 weeks later, Kristen was sitting in the plush corner office of Sterling and Finch, feeling like the king of the world. The view of the Seattle skyline was magnificent. He swirled a glass of Macallan 18, watching the ferry boats cut across the sound. "You look like the cat who ate the canary, and the canary was dipped in gold," his partner, David Finch, laughed, walking in. David was older, balder, and significantly more cautious. But he liked Kristen's hunger. "Life is good, Dave," Kristen grinned. "Bella and I just put a deposit on the penthouse at the Four Seasons. And the divorce? Smooth sailing. Gray didn't even fight. She moved out 3 days ago." "No alimony fight?" "No lawyer?" David asked, raising an eyebrow. "Usually the quiet ones get nasty in court." "Gray doesn't have the stomach for a fight," Kristen dismissed, waving his hand. She moved to... Wait for it. Queens. New York? No, a neighborhood called Queens in some rundown part of Tacoma, Kristen laughed. Or maybe she actually went to New York. I don't know. She sent the keys in an envelope, said she was going to find herself. Good luck to her. She'll be back to shelving books in no time. Just then, Kristen's secretary, a nervous young woman named Sarah, buzzed in. "Mr. Sterling, there's a..." Delivery for you." "Send it in," Kristen said. He expected flowers from Bella, or perhaps a bottle of wine from a client. Instead, a courier walked in. He was dressed in a dark suit, wearing white gloves. He carried a small, sealed letter on a silver tray. Not a cardboard envelope. A silver tray. Kristen frowned. "What is this?" "Correspondence for Mr. Sterling regarding the dissolution of marriage," the courier said. His accent was unplaceable. Euro-Atlantic, posh. Kristen took the envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored paper, sealed with red wax. He broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Dear Mr. Sterling, regarding your petition for divorce, accepted. Regarding the settlement of assets, declined. You stated in your filing that I brought 0 assets into the marriage. This is factually incorrect. However, due to the terms of your prenuptial agreement, which you insisted upon to protect your $40,000 in student loans, you waived rights to all spousal assets acquired prior to or during the union. My legal team thanks you for your foresight. Please vacate the premises at 4200 Olive Way by midnight tonight. The building has been purchased. Regards, C." Kristen read it twice. He looked up at David, forcing a laugh. "Is this a joke? She says she bought my apartment building?" David frowned, pulling out his phone. "Kristen, 4200 Olive Way. That building is owned by a holding company, Styria Holdings. Yeah, some faceless corp. My landlord is a guy named Gary." "Check your email," David said, his face turning pale. "I just got a notification from the real estate listing. The building sold this morning. Cash offer, $40 million. Kristen dropped his whiskey glass. It shattered on the floor, amber liquid soaking into the Persian rug. "Gray has $400 in her bank account, David. I saw it. She uses coupons for toothpaste. She didn't buy a $40 million building." "Maybe she has a new boyfriend," David suggested, though he looked doubtful. "Someone with deep pockets?" Kristen felt a surge of jealousy mixed with confusion. "Impossible. She's grey. She wears cardigans. She reads Jane Austen." His phone buzzed. It was Bella. "Babe, why is my credit card declined? I'm at Cartier." Kristen frowned. He quickly logged into his bank account. Access denied. Account frozen pending investigation. SEC regulations. "What the hell?" Kristen stammered. "David, my accounts are frozen." David looked at his own computer screen. "Kristen, who exactly was your wife?" "She was an orphan. She grew up in a foster home in Oregon," Kristen yelled, panic rising in his chest. "I vetted her. I checked her background." "Did you?" David turned his monitor around. "Because I just ran a deep check on the name she signed on the divorce papers you filed this morning. I thought it was a joke, so I didn't mention it." "What name?" "Gray von Habsburg Lothringen." Kristen stared at him. That's a royal name. That's like saying she's a Kennedy." "No," David whispered. "It's older than the Kennedys. Kristen, if this is real, you didn't just divorce a librarian. You divorced a woman whose family used to own half of Europe." Kristen sank into his leather chair. The silence in the room was deafening. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, in New York City. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse of the Pierre Hotel. Gray stepped out. The cardigan was gone. She was wearing a tailored black jumpsuit by Alexander McQueen. Her hair was blown out, sleek and shining. On her ears, diamond studs the size of kumquats caught the light. Hans, her family's longtime retainer, a man who looked like a grandfather but could assemble a sniper rifle in the dark, bowed low. "Welcome home, Your Highness," he said. "It's good to be back, Hans," Gray said, walking over to the window that overlooked Central Park. The city lights twinkled like spilled jewels. "Is the acquisition of the Seattle property complete?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Sterling has been served the eviction notice. We also flagged his accounts for suspicious activity regarding that offshore transfer he made last week to hide his bonus from you. The SEC is curious. Gray smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a cold, satisfied smile. Good. He wanted a woman who understood legacy. He's about to learn that some legacies are built on blood, and others are just built on credit cards. And the mistress? Hans asked. Miss Dupont? Gray turned, her eyes flashing. Isabella Dupont is desperate to get into the Met Gala this year. She's been bribing board members for a ticket. Ensure she gets one. Hans looked confused. You want her to attend? Oh, yes, Gray said, pouring herself a glass of vintage champagne. I want her there. I want Kristen there. Because this year, the gala is being hosted by the European Arts Council. She took a sip. And guess who the new chairwoman is? Kristen Sterling was not a man who panicked. He was a man who strategized. But staring at his frozen bank account screen in the frantic fluorescent light of his office, strategy was failing him. It's a glitch, he told Isabella over the phone, loosening his tie. The bank is just running a security audit. I'll have access to the funds by Monday. Well, you better. Isabella's voice was tinny and sharp. I just put the deposit on the penthouse with my card, Kristen. Daddy is going to be furious if he sees a charge that big. He thinks you're taking care of me. I am taking care of you, Bella, Kristen snapped, then instantly softened his tone. I'm sorry. It's just stress. The merger at work. He hung up and put his head in his hands. There was no merger. The partners at Sterling and Finch had suspended him pending the SEC inquiry into the offshore accounts he hadn't touched. Someone was systematically dismantling his life, brick by brick. He had tried to call Gray 50 times. Every time, the number you have dialed is no longer in service. He went to the library where she used to work. The head librarian, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who smelled of peppermint and judgment, simply smiled when he asked for Gray's forwarding address. Gray? Mrs. Gable asked. Oh, she didn't leave an address. But she did leave this for you. She handed him a library book. Great expectations. She said you should read the chapter about Miss Havisham, Mrs. Gable said, her eyes twinkling with malice. Something about how money doesn't make a gentleman. Kristen stormed out. He was losing his mind. He needed a win. He needed something to prove to Isabella, to his partners, and to himself that he was still a winner. Then the courier arrived at the temporary apartment he was renting, since he had been evicted from his own building. It was a heavy, matte black envelope with gold leaf edging. Kristen opened it, his hands shaking slightly. Inside was the holy grail of New York society. 2 tickets. The Metropolitan Museum of Art Costume Institute Gala. Theme: Monarchy and Modernity. Guest of honor: the Duchess of Styria. Admit: Mr. Kristen Sterling and guest. Kristen gasped. People killed for these tickets. A table cost $300,000. He hadn't applied. He hadn't paid. Bella, he shouted, grabbing his phone. Pack your bags. We're going to New York. For what? The Met Gala. We got invited. There was a scream of delight on the other end. I knew it. I knew your connections were real, Kristen. Oh my God, I have to call Valentino. I have to call Vogue. Kristen stared at the invite. He felt a surge of triumph. See? He was still important. The universe recognized his value. Gray might have messed with his bank account, but she couldn't touch his status. This was the big leagues. But if Kristen had looked closer at the invitation, at the heavy wax seal on the back, he would have noticed the crest. The double-headed eagle. The same eagle that was on the ring Gray kept in her knitting box. In the Pierre Hotel penthouse, Gray sat while a team of seamstresses pinned layers of midnight blue velvet around her waist. Tighter, Gray commanded. Your Highness, you won't be able to breathe, the head seamstress worried. I don't need to breathe, Gray said, looking at her reflection. I need to look like a weapon. Hans entered the room, holding a tablet. The bait is taken, Hans said. Mr. Sterling has RSVP'd. He and Miss Dupont are staying at the Standard, a modest choice. They're broke, Hans, Gray said dryly. Or at least he is. and Isabella is too selfish to spend her own trust fund on him. There is one matter, Hans said, his face growing serious. Your cousin, Prince Stefan, is asking why you are doing this. Why reveal yourself now? You spent 10 years hiding. You gave up the title to live a normal life. Why risk the paparazzi, the kidnappers, the madness, for a man like him? Gray motioned for the seamstresses to step back. She walked to the window. Why indeed? She had fled Vienna when she was 22, because the pressure of the title, the arranged marriages, and the constant scrutiny were suffocating. She wanted to be loved for her, not for the Duchy of Styria. She thought she found that with Kristen. She thought he loved Gray the librarian. She thought the poverty, the struggle, the shared ramen noodles, she thought that was intimacy. Because, Hans, Gray said softly, he didn't just break my heart. He made me feel small. He looked at me, the real me, and told me I wasn't enough because I didn't have a checkbook. She turned back, her eyes hard. He loved the mask I wore because he thought it was safe. Now, he's going to meet the face underneath, and I want the whole world to watch him realize what he threw away. The first Monday in May, the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art were transformed into a river of red carpet and flashing bulbs. The air buzzed with the screaming of fans and the click, click, click of 1,000 cameras. Kristen stepped out of the hired limo, adjusting his tuxedo. He felt good. He looked good. Beside him, Isabella was a vision in a neon pink tulle dress that took up most of the back seat. It was loud, it was expensive, and it screamed, "Look at me." "Kristen, get on my good side," Isabella hissed, posing aggressively for the paparazzi. The photographers shouted, but not for them. "Rihanna, look here! Clooney! To the left!" They were largely ignoring Kristen and Isabella. To the press, they were just filler guests, rich nobodies filling the space between movie stars. Isabella pouted as they walked up the stairs. "Why aren't they taking our picture? Do they know who my father is?" "Don't worry, babe," Kristen soothed her, though his own ego was bruising. "Once we get inside, we'll rub elbows with the real power." They reached the top of the stairs, where the hosts stood to greet the guests. Usually it was Anna Wintour and a celebrity co-chair. Tonight, there was Anna Wintour, looking iconic in her sunglasses. And next to her, Kristen stopped walking. He blinked. The woman standing next to Anna was wearing a gown of deep midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light. It was embroidered with real diamonds that glittered like stars. On her head sat a tiara, not a costume piece, but a heavy, ancient thing of iron and sapphires. She stood with a posture that made the movie stars look like they were slouching. "Who is that?" Isabella whispered, awestruck. "Is that a movie star? She looks royal." The woman turned her head, her eyes locked onto Kristen's. Kristen felt his blood turn to ice. The face was different, expertly made up, sharper, colder. But the eyes, the brown eyes that had watched him eat toast for 5 years. "Gray?" he choked out. The line moved forward. Kristen was paralyzed. He was shoved gently by a security guard. "Keep moving, sir." He stumbled forward until he was standing directly in front of her. "Gray?" he said again, his voice cracking. What are you doing here? Did you get a job catering?" It was a stupid thing to say. A desperate thing to say. Anna Wintour leaned in slightly. "I'm sorry. Is this guest bothering you, Your Highness?" "Your Highness." Kristen's brain short-circuited. Gray looked at him. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She looked at him with the detached curiosity one might have for a bug on a windshield. "Hello, Kristen," she said. Her voice wasn't the soft mumble of the librarian. It was projected, crisp, mid-Atlantic. "I see you brought the Mistress. That dress is certainly a choice. Very bright." Isabella bristled. "Excuse me. Who do you think you are?" "I'm Isabella DuPont." Gray laughed. It was a terrifying sound. "I know who you are, my dear. Your father's logistics company ships my family's steel exports. I believe we just renegotiated his contract." I should probably tell him his daughter is wearing last season's tulle. Isabella's jaw dropped. Kristen was shaking. Gray, Your Highness, what is going on? Gray took a step forward. The cameras sensed the tension. Hundreds of lenses swung towards them. Flashbulbs erupted like a supernova. You wanted a woman with a legacy, Kristen, Gray said, her voice loud enough for the reporters nearby to hear. You told me I was too poor, too simple. You said I faded. She gestured to the massive banner hanging above the museum entrance. The Habsburg Collection, 6 centuries of imperial power. My name is Gray von Habsburg-Lothringen, Duchess of Styria, Countess of the Tyrol. The art inside this museum? It belongs to my grandmother. The building you lived in? I own it. The bank that froze your assets? My family sits on the board. Kristen felt the world tilting. The photographers were going crazy. He could hear them shouting, Is that her ex? The guy who dumped the Duchess? Look at his face. You didn't divorce a librarian, Kristen, Gray whispered, leaning in so only he could hear. You divorced an empire. Gray, please, Kristen stammered, sweating profusely now. We can talk about this. I didn't know. If I had known, if you had known, you would have stayed, Gray said, her eyes dead. And that is exactly why you didn't deserve to know. She turned to the security head. Remove them, she said calmly. They are cluttering my red carpet. Wait, Isabella shrieked as a large guard grabbed her arm. You can't kick us out. We have tickets. I sent you those tickets, Gray smiled, because I wanted to see the look on your face when you realized that you traded a diamond for a rhinestone. Get them out, the guard barked. Kristen was dragged backward, stumbling down the stairs he had just ascended with such pride. He watched as Gray turned back to the crowd, the cameras worshipping her, the diamonds on her head shining brighter than any future he would ever have. He was at the bottom of the stairs, humiliated, in front of the entire world. And the worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't the fame. It was the realization that the woman he had treated like furniture was the most magnificent creature he had ever seen, and he had handed her the divorce papers himself. The morning after the Met Gala, Kristen Sterling woke up in a hotel room wall that smelled of stale cigarettes. It wasn't the Standard. It was a Motel 6 in New Jersey. He reached for his phone, praying it was all a nightmare. It wasn't. His notifications were broken. Thousands of messages. He opened Twitter, X. The #1 trending topic in the world was #the Duchess and the douchebag. Someone had filmed the confrontation on the red carpet. The video had 40 million views. Kristen clicked play. He watched himself, sweaty, pathetic, stammering, while Gray stood like a Greek goddess, verbally eviscerating him with the poise of a queen. You traded a diamond for a rhinestone. The internet was merciless. Asterisk at Gray Stan account. Imagine fumbling a literal princess for a girl who wears neon tulle. Men are trash. Asterisk at CryptoBro99. Dude lost the bag. He lost the whole factory. Asterisk at Royal Watcher. That's Gray von Habsburg. She's been missing for a decade. The runaway Duchess. She came back just to roast her ex. Iconic. Kristen threw the phone across the room. The door opened. Isabella walked in. She wasn't wearing the neon dress. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie, carrying a Louis Vuitton duffel bag. I'm leaving, she said. Bella, wait, Kristen pleaded, sitting up. We can fix this. It's just bad PR. We'll do an interview. We'll spin it. There is no we, Kristen, Isabella spat. My father called this morning. Do you know who his biggest client is? Styria Steel. That's Gray's family. They called him at 6 a.m. and told him that if I was ever seen with you again, they'd pull the contract. That's $1 billion loss. She threw a room key on the bed. Daddy cut off my cards until I dump you. So, you're dumped. And honestly, Gray was right. You are a downgrade. She slammed the door. Kristen sat in the silence. He had no job, no apartment, no girlfriend, no reputation. His bank accounts were still frozen. He had $18 in his wallet. He put his head in his hands and wept. Not for the loss of Gray, but for the loss of himself. He had built his entire identity on being successful, and in 24 hours, the woman he called a nobody had stripped him naked in front of the world. Meanwhile, at the Pierre Hotel, the mood should have been celebratory. Gray sat in her suite, wearing a silk robe, staring at the front page of the New York Times. Her face was everywhere. The return of the Duchess. Hans poured her tea. You have achieved total victory, Your Highness. Mr. Sterling is ruined. The press loves you. The board is ready to reinstate you as the head of the family trust. Gray took the tea. Her hand was trembling. It feels empty, Hans, she whispered. Revenge often does, Hans noted gently. It is a meal that fills the stomach, but not the soul. It's not just that, Gray said, walking to the window. She looked down at the crowds gathering outside the hotel, hoping for a glimpse of her. I exposed myself. I spent 10 years becoming Gray Whitney because I wanted to be safe. I wanted to be free from them. Them? Hans stiffened. You mean the cousins? The reformists? I mean Victor, Gray said, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Hans went pale. Victor is in prison, Your Highness. He has been in a Swiss facility for the mentally criminally insane since the incident. Are you sure? Gray asked, clutching her robe. Because I saw someone in the crowd last night, at the gala. Just for a second. Behind the photographers, he was smiling. Hans set down the teapot. I will increase security. No one gets in or out without a biometric scan. You are safe here. But Gray wasn't so sure. She remembered why she had run away to America. It wasn't just the boredom of royal life. It was the night her car brakes had been cut in Vienna. It was the obsession of a distant cousin, Count Victor von Lichtenberg, who believed that by ancient law she belonged to him, and if he couldn't have her, the title shouldn't exist. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Gray hesitated, then picked up. Hello? You looked beautiful in blue, Liebling, a voice purred. Smooth, cultured, terrifying. Gray dropped the phone. It wasn't Kristen. It was Victor. 3 weeks later. Kristen Sterling was learning humility the hard way. He was currently wearing a white vest and black bow tie, holding a tray of champagne flutes. He was working for a high-end catering company. It was the only job he could get. No law firm would touch him. He was radioactive. Tonight, he was working at the Guggenheim Museum, a private charity auction for European antiquities. He knew she would be here. He told himself he wasn't stalking her. He told himself he just needed the paycheck. But deep down, he knew he was hoping for something. A chance to apologize? A chance to yell at her? He didn't know. He adjusted his collar, keeping his head down. He looked thinner. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. Champagne? He mumbled to a passing guest, avoiding eye contact. Then the room went silent. Gray entered. She was breathtaking. She wore a backless emerald green gown, her hair swept up, exposing the long, elegant line of her neck. She was surrounded by a phalanx of security guards. Kristen watched from the shadows of the bar. She looked regal, yes. But she also looked tired. Her eyes were darting around the room, nervous. She wasn't smiling. She moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting bows. Excellent turnout, Hans murmured into his earpiece, hovering close to her. I just want to go home, Hans, Gray whispered. I feel like eyes are burning into me. 1 hour, Your Highness. Then we leave. Kristen watched as Gray moved towards the balcony for some fresh air. The security guard stayed by the door, giving her space. As he was bussing a table near the balcony entrance, Kristen saw a man slip past the security detail. The man was dressed in a tuxedo, but he moved differently than the other guests. Like a cat, he was handsome, with pale blonde hair and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He carried 2 glasses of champagne. Kristen frowned. He knew the catering staff. That man wasn't a waiter, and guests didn't carry drinks to other guests. They took them from trays. Something about the man's focus set off an alarm in Kristen's brain. The man wasn't looking at Gray with admiration. He was looking at her with ownership. Kristen abandoned his tray on a table. He moved quietly towards the balcony doors. On the balcony, Gray gripped the railing, breathing in the cool night air. "A lovely view for a lovely traitor," a voice said behind her. Gray spun around. She gasped, backing up against the railing. "Victor!" The man smiled, holding out a glass. "Hello, cousin. It's been a long time. You played the librarian very well, but you can't hide from blood. Stay back," Gray warned, her voice trembling. "I have guards. Your guards are watching the door," Victor said, stepping closer. "And by the time they realize you're gone, we will be halfway to the airfield. I have a plane waiting. We're going home, Gray, to the castle in the Alps, where no one will ever find you." "I'm not going with you," Gray spat. Victor's face twisted. "Well, you don't have a choice. You are the last of the line. You belong to the family. You belong to me." He lunged. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. Gray screamed, but the noise of the party inside drowned it out. He pulled a syringe from his pocket with his other hand. "A little sedative," Victor whispered, "for the flight." Suddenly, the balcony door crashed open. "Hey!" Victor turned. Kristen Sterling stood there. He looked ridiculous in his ill-fitting waiter's uniform, but his fists were clenched. "Let her go," Kristen said. Victor laughed. "And who are you? The help?" "I'm her husband," Kristen said. The words came out automatically. "Well, ex-husband, whatever. Get your hands off her." Gray stared at him, shock momentarily replacing her fear. "Kristen! Run, Gray!" Kristen yelled. He charged. Kristen was not a fighter. He was a corporate lawyer. He did Pilates. Victor was a trained fencer, and by the looks of him, a psychopath. Victor simply sidestepped Kristen's clumsy tackle and backhanded him across the face. Kristen went down hard, tasting blood. "Pathetic," Victor sneered. He turned back to Gray, raising the syringe. But the distraction had given Gray a second. She kicked off her high heels. As Victor turned back to her, Kristen scrambled up from the floor. He didn't try to punch Victor this time. He tackled him around the waist, driving him backward into the stone railing. "Gray, go!" Kristen screamed, holding onto Victor's legs for dear life as the Austrian count rained blows down on Kristen's back. Gray didn't run. She looked at the heavy champagne bottle on the nearby table. She grabbed it, with a primal yell, not a Duchess yell, but a Gray from Tacoma yell. She smashed the bottle over Victor's head. Glass shattered. Green glass and expensive champagne exploded everywhere. Victor crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Kristen lay on the ground, panting, his nose bleeding, his white vest stained with champagne and blood. The balcony doors burst open. Hans and the security team swarmed in, guns drawn. "Your Highness!" Hans cried, rushing to Gray. "Are you injured?" Gray stood over Victor's body, breathing hard. She looked at the unconscious man, then at Kristen. Kristen pushed himself up to a sitting position, wiping blood from his lip. He looked at Gray, expecting her to mock him, to tell him he was clumsy, to tell security to throw him out. Kristen wheezed. "I think he's out." Gray looked at the man who had broken her heart, the man who had filed for divorce because she was too poor. He was currently bleeding on a tuxedo that wasn't his, having just fought a psychopath to save her life. Gray dropped to her knees, not to check on Victor, but to check on Kristen. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You absolute idiot. You could have been killed." "Yeah, well," Kristen managed a weak, bloody grin. "I guess I still wanted to prove I could protect you." Gray looked at Hans. "Get the medical team," she commanded. "For him," she pointed at Kristen, "and get the police for my cousin." As the medics rushed in, Gray took Kristen's hand. It was the first time she had touched him since the day he left the apartment. "This doesn't fix anything, Kristen," she said softly. "I know," Kristen whispered, his eyes closing as the adrenaline faded. "But it's a start." The weeks following the incident at the Guggenheim Museum dissolved into a strange, grey blur for Kristen Sterling. The media storm had eventually broken, moving on to the next scandal, leaving him washed up on the shores of anonymity. He was no longer the viral villain or the hero husband. He was just a man with a healing fracture in his cheekbone and a bank account that had finally been unfrozen, only to reveal the meager remnants of a life he had torpedoed. It was early June in New York City. The humidity was beginning to rise, clinging to the skin. But Central Park offered a sanctuary of green shadows and filtered sunlight. Kristen sat on a weathered wooden bench near the Bethesda fountain, a spot usually teeming with tourists. Today, however, it was relatively quiet, save for the distant sound of a cello being played near the angel statue. Kristen looked different. The sharp, bespoke suits were gone, sold to consignment shops to pay for his temporary sublet in Queens. He wore a simple navy button-down with the sleeves rolled up and a pair of dark denim jeans. He had lost weight, the softness of corporate lunches replaced by a gaunt, hungry angle to his jaw. But the most striking change was the scar, a thin, jagged line running along his left cheekbone, a permanent souvenir from the ring on Count Victor's hand. He traced the scar absently with his thumb. It was strange. He didn't hate the mark. In a life built on superficial perfection, on teeth whitening and resume padding, this scar was the only thing he owned that felt completely honest. It was the receipt for the one decent thing he had done in 10 years. He checked his watch. It was a cheap digital model. The Rolex was gone, too. She was late. Or maybe she wasn't coming. Maybe this was the final humiliation, to leave him waiting on a park bench like a discarded wrapper. Then the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a noise, but a sudden, palpable tension in the air. The birds seemed to quiet down. 2 men in dark suits appeared at the periphery of the path, scanning the area with professional paranoia. They weren't police, they were private security, moving with the heavy grace of apex predators. Between them walked Gray. Kristen stood up, his legs feeling heavy. He had prepared a dozen speeches. He had rehearsed apologies in the mirror until the words lost their meaning. But seeing her now, all the words evaporated. She was not wearing a tiara. She wasn't draped in the velvet of the Met Gala or the emerald silk of the Guggenheim. She wore a cream-colored linen suit, impeccably tailored but understated, and large tortoiseshell sunglasses. Her hair was pulled back in a loose chignon. She looked like a wealthy, private citizen, except for the way she walked. There was no hesitation in her stride, no apology in her posture. It was the walk of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. She stopped 5 feet away from him. The bodyguards hung back, just out of earshot, but their eyes never left Kristen. "Kristen," she said. Her voice was calm, stripped of the anger that had defined their confrontation on the red carpet. It was worse than anger. It was distance. "Gray," Kristen replied, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for meeting me. I know you're busy." "I am returning to Vienna tomorrow," she said, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were dark and unreadable. "My regency has been fully reinstated. The board is satisfied that the threat from Victor has been neutralized." "Is he?" "He is in a facility in the Austrian Alps," Gray said, her tone cooling. "He will never hurt anyone again. The family has ways of dealing with its own that the American legal system cannot quite match." A shiver went down Kristen's spine. He looked at her, searching for the librarian who used to cry over commercials featuring lost puppies. She was gone. In her place was the Duchess of Styria, a woman who spoke of neutralizing threats and family protocols. "I'm glad you're safe," Kristen said, and he meant it. "That's all I wanted." Gray tilted her head, studying his face. Her gaze lingered on the scar. "The doctors tell me your cheekbone has healed, but the nerve damage might be permanent," she said softly. "Does it hurt?" "Only when I smile," Kristen said, attempting a weak grin that tugged at the scar tissue, which hasn't been often lately. Unwan. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant cello. "Why did you ask to see me, Kristen?" Gray asked finally. "Was it to discuss the settlement? Because my lawyers have already drafted the proposal." "No," Kristen said quickly. "I don't want the money. I don't want a single cent of the Habsburg fortune, Gray. I know you probably don't believe that, but it's true." He took a step forward, then stopped when one of the guards shifted. He stayed where he was. "I wanted to apologize," Kristen said, his voice trembling slightly. "Not for the divorce, not even for the affair. Though God knows I regret it, I wanted to apologize for underestimating you. For 6 years, I looked at you, and I saw someone I needed to fix. I thought because you were quiet, you were weak. I thought because you were content, you were unambitious. I was so obsessed with building a legacy that I didn't realize I was living with a woman who had more strength in her little finger than I had in my whole body." He looked down at his scuffed boots. "You saved yourself that night at the museum. I just tackled him. You were the one who finished it. You were always the strong one. I was just scenery." Gray watched him for a long moment. The hard line of her mouth softened, just a fraction. She walked over to the bench and sat down, smoothing her linen skirt. She patted the empty space beside her. "Sit, Kristen." He sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "You weren't just scenery," she said quietly. "You took a blow meant for me. Victor had a syringe. If he had injected me, I would have been on a plane to a black site before the gala was over. You didn't just tackle him. You bought me the seconds I needed to survive. You saved my life." "I owed you that," Kristen whispered, "for the years I wasted." "You didn't waste them," Gray said, looking out at the fountain. "Those years, they were a vacation for me. A vacation from duty, from fear. When I was with you, in that tiny apartment, clipping coupons and watching bad reality TV, I was just Gray, not your highness. Not the asset, just Gray. And even though it ended badly, I loved being her. I loved who I was when I was with you." She turned to face him, and her eyes were wet. "But we cannot go back there. That apartment doesn't exist anymore, and that Gray doesn't exist anymore. She died the moment you slid those divorce papers across the table." Kristen nodded, the lump in his throat making it hard to breathe. "I know, I'm not asking for a second chance. I know I don't deserve one. I needed you to know that I see you now. The real you. And she's magnificent." Gray let out a shaky breath. She reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I have something for you," she said. Kristen recoiled slightly. "Gray, I told you I don't want a check. I can't take your money. It would kill the last bit of self-respect I have." "It's not a check," she said, placing the heavy envelope on the wood between them. Kristen stared at it. "What is it?" "Open it." Kristen picked up the envelope. His hands were shaking. He undid the clasp and slid the contents out. On top was a legal document. Decree of dissolution of marriage. It was signed. Final. The end of Sterling versus Sterling. But underneath the legal paperwork was a thick deed, bound in blue paper and a set of heavy brass keys on a ring. Kristen squinted at the address on the deed. 114 South Jackson Street, Seattle, Washington. His eyes widened. He knew that address. "The Dusty Spine?" he whispered. It was a small, struggling used bookstore in Pioneer Square. It smelled of old paper and rain. When they were first dating, when Kristen was a stressed law student and Gray was a librarian, they used to spend hours there. It was the only place Kristen ever relaxed. He had once told her, half joking, that if he didn't have to be a master of the universe, he would just sit in that window seat and read all day. "I bought the building," Gray said matter-of-factly, "and the inventory, and the upstairs loft apartment. It's all in your name, free and clear. The taxes are prepaid for the next 10 years. "Gray," Kristen choked out, This is prime real estate. This is worth millions. I can't. You can. she interrupted firmly. "Consider it a severance package, or a finder's fee for saving a duchess. Call it what you want." She stood up, looking down at him. The sun caught her profile, making her look like the statue of an empress on a coin. "You were miserable, Kristen," she said. "I watched you for 5 years trying to be a shark. You aren't a shark. You're a reader. You're a man who likes quiet mornings and old stories. You broke us because you were trying to force yourself into a mold that didn't fit, and you blamed me for not fitting into it with you." She gestured to the keys in his hand. "Stop trying to conquer the world. You're not good at it. Go back to Seattle. Run the shop. Read the books. Find out who Kristen is when he isn't trying to impress people who don't care about him." Kristen gripped the cold brass keys. Tears spilled over, running down his cheeks, stinging the scar. It was the most humiliating and the most beautiful moment of his life. She had seen right through him. She had seen the weakness he tried to hide with ambition, and instead of punishing him for it, she had given him an exit strategy. "You're right," he whispered. "You were always right." "I know," Gray smiled. It was a sad, final smile. "That's why I was the Duchess." She turned to leave. Hans, the head of security, stepped forward to open the door of the waiting black SUV. "Gray," Kristen called out, standing up. She paused, her hand on the car door. She didn't turn around. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. The question hung in the humid air, desperate and small. Gray looked at her reflection in the tinted window of the car. She saw the woman she had become, hardened, powerful, alone. "No, Kristen," she said softly. "I don't think you will. The world I live in. The air is too thin for you there." She slid into the car. The heavy door thudded shut, sealing her away in a capsule of bulletproof glass and climate-controlled silence. Kristen stood on the curb and watched as the convoy pulled away, merging into the traffic of Fifth Avenue, disappearing into the canyon of steel and glass. He watched until the black SUV was just another dot in the distance. He looked down at the divorce papers in his left hand and the keys in his right. He had lost the girl. He had lost the status. He had lost the dream of the penthouse and the Porsche. But as he stood there, feeling the weight of the brass keys, Kristen realized something strange. The crushing anxiety that had ridden on his shoulders for a decade, the fear of failure, the need to prove himself, was gone. He took a sip of his lukewarm bodega coffee. It tasted bitter and burnt. "Seattle," he said to himself. He turned and began to walk out of the park. He didn't walk with the swagger of a junior partner anymore. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his bruised ribs, moving slowly, like a man who finally had nowhere important to be, and all the time in the world to get there. And that is where we leave Kristen. He got exactly what he deserved, just not in the way he expected. He lost the boring wife he took for granted, only to find out she was the most interesting person in the room. He chased a life of glitz and glamour with Isabella, only to end up alone, scarred and humbled. But Gray gave him the ultimate punishment, which was also the ultimate gift. She forced him to be himself. She left him with a small bookstore and a lifetime of what-ifs. Every time he shelves a book or locks up the shop at night, he has to live with the knowledge that he held a queen in his arms and traded her for a little bit of fool's gold. It's a powerful reminder. Value isn't about what you can see on the surface. It's about history, character, and loyalty. Kristen learned that lesson the hard way. If you were Gray, would you have given him the bookstore, or would you have left him on the street with absolutely nothing? Was that an act of love or an act of pity? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this saga of royalty, betrayal, and redemption, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. I have an even crazier story coming for you next week. Thanks for watching.